Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name's Kyle and I want to do a quick video. Well, it's probably in my mind quick, but it might not take, it might take more than a couple minutes to explain. I'm going to show you guys how I figure out how to cut a stair stringer. So we're standing in this little alcove here and I've got to build a staircase to go up that way. So it's going to be a simple, straightforward staircase. I'll tell you how I come up with the angle, how I come up with the cuts, and let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so the first thing that I'm gonna do is I need to know the height to my landing up top. And you want to know what your finished material on top of your subfloor is gonna be. So this is all gonna get carpeted up the stairs, and up top is gonna get carpeted, which means the same level thickness of finishes are gonna be applied upstairs as my stair treads, which means it's a little bit simpler for me. I don't have to think about any 3/4 inch hardwood or 3/8 inch tile or anything like that. I can just go ahead and get the dimension from my concrete to the top of my landing here. 9 foot 1 inch. So I know that because I set all my headers and my walls at that dimension with a laser. So if you didn't build the surroundings and you're just putting a stair step in, you just got to make sure that you get the accurate dimension from the bottom to the top. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go over to the lumber where I'm going to cut my stringers, and I'll tell you how I figure out how to cut those to make them fit. Now that I have the height of my opening, which is 9 foot 1, I need to use that to figure out what my rise and run is going to be. Now, my run is going to be pretty standard. I always do the same thing. I use a 2x12 tread for all of my staircases, unless it's a special situation. Sometimes I'm going to change the depth of my cut, maybe a little bit bigger of an overhang. In this case, because what I have to work with, I'm gonna make my run 10 inches on my cut. Now, you may be saying, well, 10 inches isn't 11 1/4, Kyle. I know, because there'll be a stair nosing. So when you step on it, I like to have a nosing on my stair and not just have it go straight up and down. I feel like it's a lot more comfortable to step in versus to have a flat riser right up to your tread. That's just personal preference. I don't know if there's a code difference one way or the other or a better way of doing it. It's just how I've always done it. So my run is going to be 10 inches, which works really well for my opening because I've got about 142 inches and I know I'm going to be around 15 total steps. So what I'm going to do is type in 9 foot 1 inch and I'm going to divide it by 15, which is going to give me 7 1/4 inches. So 7 1/4 inches is what I come up with when I divide my total height by 15. So I cheated a little bit because I've done this before. I know that my ceilings with an 8 foot wall, an 11 7/8 I-joist, it's going to be right at 15 steps and a 7 1/4 rise. Now you might be saying, but I thought code was 7 inches. You should always check your local codes, talk to any code officials in your area. I can do 7 1/4 in this situation. It's not a public accessible staircase and it works well and is all good. So don't worry about that. 7 1/4 is going to be my rise. Now what I do is I take my calculator, I'm going to go 7 1/4 inch rise, 10 inch run, and that's going to give me a pitch of 35.94, or I could say 8 11/16. Now, 8 11/16, imagine you having a 412 pitch roof. This is an 8 11/16 12 pitch staircase. That's the steepness of it. Now that'll come into play later because what I'm gonna do is every stair step has a diagonal of 12 3/8. What that means is every stair step has a run and a rise. And that connecting diagonal that connects the run and the rise is 12 3/8. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to step off this entire stringer at 12 3/8. Now, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to set up my square so that it has that same rise and run. So what I've done is I've set my square up so that when I set it up against my lumber, I've got 7 1/4 inches and I've got 10 inches right here, okay? Pretty easy to do, and what that allows me to do is to mark 7 1/4 by 10 inches and get this triangle. This triangle is going to get cut out. My riser will go here and my tread runner will come right here, giving me my stair step. So I maximize my material. I go all the way to the bottom, and what I'm doing is marking the first face on my first riser, which I'll talk about this later. This is going to be a little bit different. What you have to do here is subtract your tread thickness from the bottom of your riser, because the first step doesn't have anything below it. Imagine if I were to leave this like this, put a tread on here, put a riser here, mark another one, put another tread here. As I go up, all the treads that I put on every step mean that from this distance to this distance will stay the same. But here I added a tread thickness. So I've already got my 7 1/4 rise plus another tread thickness, giving me, which by the way, I'm using 1 1/8 legacy subfloor for my treads. And that would give me another 1 1/8 on top of my 7 1/4. So I actually need to come down here, and I will be subtracting an 1 1/8 from my first tread there. So that way when I put my first riser on and my first tread, that will be the same consistent step up on every single one. Now all I'm going to do is take my square, I'm going to run it along my material, making sure that I line up the riser with my 10-inch mark right on my square, and I mark it off. Then I'm going to go do the same thing. Now, that's easy, you can do that, but if you want to be more precise, this dimension, because we know math, we know that this is 10, this is 7 1/4, this long dimension is 12 3/8. So I can step off my entire length of my material every 12 3/8 and make just a little tick mark, knowing that every time I put my square, I'm going to line it up with that tick mark. Otherwise, what can happen is I'm eyeballing where my square goes based on my last line. And if there's any inconsistencies in your material, it can slowly get bigger or smaller than what you want it to be. So I like to always lay out my entire stringer before I put my square on and make my triangles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get a mark on my first step. And I'm going to go ahead and set a nail so I can pull my tape measure from this point. And then I'm going to make a mark every 12 3/8 of an inch. So this first one, I'm good. Second one, I'm good. Okay, so I'm going 3/4, and now I'm going to be 3'1 1/8, 4'1 1/2, 5'1 7/8, 6'2 1/4, and so on and so forth. I think you get the idea. And the reason I'm doing that, once again, is so when I take my square, I can line up perfectly with those tick marks and have a visual confirmation that I'm not growing or shrinking on my dimensions. It's just a little precautionary safety measure, because I can promise you it's easy to get off when you're just eyeballing things. All right, now that I've got these all laid out, what I did was I counted my treads. I need 14 treads, because remember the 15th is actually my upstairs landing. And I went ahead, and when I made this 14th one, I went ahead and flipped my square around and then marked this way. This is what I will cut off, and this is what's going to go against my, that's what's going to go up against my, shoot, I actually got to do this too. So just like your bottom, where you have to account for not having a riser at the bottom, I'm not going to have, or sorry, a runner at the bottom, I'm not going to have a riser up top. So I need to take off of an 1 1/8 on my, on the back cut that's going to go up against my staircase opening header. That way when my tread gets put on here and has an overhang, it's the same consistent overhang on the entire thing. So just make sure you make a mental note of that so you can stay consistent. And now we can go ahead and cut these lines out and go test it in the opening to make sure that it fits before I cut all of them. right, now I'm not gonna, I'm gonna go ahead and cut this one out actually. I'll cut this off. All right, let's go take her over there and see what it looks like. I'm sure it's gonna be just fine. A little tight squeeze. Okay, now you'll see how that just sits in there perfectly. Seated at the bottom, seated at the top. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come up here and mark 7 1/4 down from the same material here that I'm using for my treads, which is the 1 1/8. I'm gonna mark down 7 1/4. To me, this is a good sign because it fits perfectly up against my header, and down at the bottom on the floor, it looks like it's pretty much perfect there as well. So I feel good about the angles, about everything about this. This will be my template, my test. I passed the test, I think, because it looks good. So it's that easy. So now what we can do is the next step, which is cut all the stringers up. And now that I have tested this to fit, I'm gonna go ahead and cheat a little bit. And by cheat, what I mean is I'm gonna go ahead and cut all these at once. So what I'm gonna do is make sure the crowns are all going the same way. And then from top to bottom, I'm gonna make sure that they're all sitting in the exact same plane with each other. Now, throughout the middle, there could be a little bit of, you know, one or the other not being perfect, but the important thing is that the top and the bottom are perfect, and then throughout the middle, you hope for the best. You want to use, obviously, good lumber. So what I'm going to use is my beam saw, and I've got the Milwaukee power station here, the carry-on power supply. All right, let's see how this works. Now, just to be open and honest with you guys, this was not fully charged. I've actually used it a couple times, so that's why it went instantly down 1 bar. No problem. This is going to be perfect for these intermittent uses. I don't need to run my beam saw all day. It makes no sense to get a generator out, mess around with gas, getting it pull started, when I can plug it in, turn it on, and I'm good to go. There you go, we went down a bar. It was already at 1 bar down. I'd probably say that this has actually been sitting in my trailer for 2 weeks without being charged, so I don't know what that means. It's not a fresh charge, but it works really well. So anytime that I'm cutting stringers, I always try to gang cut them, screw them together so they don't move. Make your cut. I use the beam saw so that I can get as deep as possible, and then I'm gonna come through with a Sawzall and I'm gonna finish these cuts. Now, you gotta have a good blade, and the reason that's important is because when you're making your cut, you don't want a crappy blade to walk on you. All right, there's my stringers, all the same. All right, the next thing I'm gonna do on this set of steps that I don't always do, it just depends on the situation, is I'm gonna nail or fasten probably some screws, a 3/4 strip alongside the stringer. So this is some 3/4 legacy subfloor, good solid stuff. And what I'm gonna do is run it right below, my treads here, right where this little triangle comes together. And the reason I'm doing this is so I can space my stringer out far enough that when the drywaller comes in, they can run their drywaller right along this edge, making a nice clean finish and not having to cut up and around all these treads. So I'm just trying to think ahead and hopefully help them out. And also it does add some additional strength, and I will use this to not only space out my stringer for the drywaller, but I'll also fasten right through this to my studs, and it'll give it a really nice connection to my wall. And the reason I'm doing 3/4 is because there's going to be 5/8 drywall on these walls, which means you don't have to, the drywaller doesn't have to fight the gap. He'll be able to slide his 5/8 in, no problem. All right, now that can get mounted up on the wall. We'll go ahead and take this in and give one a go. So now you can see when I push it up tight, I've still got this gap here. The drywall can be set down and ran right up that angle. They can cut the angle. It's easier, it's better. It'll be a cleaner look, and I think overall it's just a nice, I think it's just a nice way to do it. And yeah, so there you go. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm not too worried about putting a mounting plate on the ground because the stairs will be fastened to my walls. It's not going to be able to slide out. So I'm not going to mess with that. Being a radiant tube heated floor, I want to minimize my risks as little as possible. So, or as great as possible. I want the smallest risk. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to fasten them to the walls, and it's not going to be able to go anywhere. But I do need to pull this up and put some seal tape on the underside so that my concrete is not in connection with my lumber right there. (46 3/4). 46 3/4. Okay, so that's where I'm going to cut these at. I'll cut them at 46 3/4, and I've got obviously a stringer to take care of in the middle also. So now that these stairs are framed in, you can see this 3/4 right here that runs as like a shim in between the stringer and the stud. Now the drywall can go right through here, and the drywaller can cut his drywall on this angle, and it will be a nice clean finish. He'll be able to get everything secured, and it won't have to be cut around all these stairs. So think about that when you're framing your stairs in. Don't just nail them directly to the stud. Now that we got everything cut, I'm going to start gluing and screwing all my treads and my risers. Now I can imagine one of the things you guys are saying is like, why are you doing an OSB tread? Well, this isn't standard OSB. Obviously, this is the 1 1/8 Legacy, and I've never done this. I don't even know if this is even recommended or proven or anything. However, I do know that without any middle stringer, with just this this tread on here, and I can walk up these steps, and they're super rigid. So by the time I add this riser, put this middle stringer in, glue and screw everything together, it's just going to be solid. And what I like about this material is it's never going to cup or warp, which is what which like every 2x12 will do. So you don't have to worry about which way the crown of the 2x12 is. It's just going to always be solid. So yeah, I don't know, maybe someday LP will start making actual treads out of this material, this method, because I think it would be a great product. So I'm using the same adhesive, the subfloor and glue. This is basically for subfloor, drywall, foam panels. It's a polyurethane foam, and it just works really good. Dude, this is so much better than using PL or whatever crap adhesive out of a. This is so much nicer, dude.
Doesn't PL like not have that strong a hold?
That's what Jordan Smith said, remember? Oh my God, these are going to be so strong. Honestly, I think that using the Legacy subfloor and the adhesive made this the strongest staircase I've ever built. It is so rigid, it's not even funny, and I've only got one stringer in the middle, but with this Legacy 1 1/8" as my riser, that's adding a ton of rigidity and strength. It's like having a little LVL beam, but it's LSL obviously, on every step.